What stirs within a mortal soul when the last light flickers? When the rot of a forgotten god breathes upon the boundary of flesh and fate? So begins the chronicle recovered from a shattered reliquary on the plague world of Syrox, a place where hope drowned centuries ago. The parchment itself wept moisture thick, green, alive. Scholars who touched it felt their fingerprints soften. They said the text read itself to whoever dared open it. It spoke of the first symptom, a warmth behind the ribs, like something waking. That warmth did not belong to the mortal host. It belonged to him, the Lord of Decay, whose gaze fell upon the broken, the desperate, the ones who whispered for mercy when the Imperium turned deaf ears. In those whispers, Nurgle found his invitation. The story continues, drifting like rot-scented fog across the corpse fields of the Spinward Front. There, a guardsman named Othrin fell during the siege of Filion Hive, bleeding out among shattered chimera hulls. His plea was not for salvation, but for witness. "Let someone remember me," he breathed. Unaware that gods listened to such hopes differently, the air thickened. Flies drummed their wings like distant thunder. Hands unseen but gentle cupped his face. Bones realigned, flesh tightened, and breath poured back in sweet, rancid, unstoppable. Othrin arose, not as a survivor, but as a seed. His heartbeat echoed with another rhythm now, one older than stars, patient and unbearably kind. Across battlefields stained in rusted blood, the transformation of the chosen always begins subtly. A man's laughter grows fuller. His wounds close too slowly, then too fast. Colors seem warmer. The scent of decay becomes comforting. To the host, these changes feel like acceptance, like finally belonging. Yet within the marrow, a different truth blooms. A living garden. Tiny tendrils of corruption take root, weaving through nerves like vines. Othrin felt no fear as he marched again beside his regiment. He felt gratitude. But others saw the shine in his eyes, saw how flies clung to his armor even in winter winds. They whispered suspicions. By the time they acted, Nurgle had already claimed his harvest. When Nurgle's touch fully awakens, reality itself shifts. Where the chosen walk, metal sweats. Stone softens like wax. Even sound sours. Footfalls squelch where they should echo. Voices vibrate like swollen drums. The plague god's love manifests as vitality corrupted life. Yes, but life that refuses to die, refuses to stay still. Othrin's regiment learned this when the first plague bloom erupted. A mass of tendrils bursting from a wounded trooper's back, waving like joyous banners. No screams followed, only sighs, as though relief had finally found them. The contagion spread not as disease, but as revelation. Men embraced their blossoming sores like blessings. The Imperium does not fear death so much as life that has forgotten obedience. The chronicle grows darker as it describes the moment the veil collapses entirely, and the Garden of Nurgle overlaps with reality. It happens quietly, always quietly. One heartbeat belongs to the mortal world. The next resonates with the hum of swollen insects and the laughter of a grandfather unseen. Rot flowers brighten with colors that should not exist. Bell-toll echoes drift from horizons where no towers stand. Othrin walked through trenches that melted into bogs, where decrepit trees sprouted bearing fruits shaped like eyes and lungs. Yet he smiled. He saw beauty, he saw welcome. And behind him, the world twisted to match his devotion. A contagion of hope, grotesque and eternal. The chronicle speaks of the gifts, those sacred boons bestowed upon the truly devoted. Flesh becomes a canvas for blooming fungi, each pulse a hymn. Limbs swell with impossible strength. Wounds become fountains of blessings, spilling virulent miracles upon the soil. Othrin's spine arched, reshaping into a carapace. His voice deepened into a gurgling chorus. Yet with each mutation, he felt more himself. The despair that once choked him dissolved. Nurgle's corruption does not erase the mortal soul, it envelops, reassures, promises purpose where the Imperium offered only exhaustion. Even as his bones liquefied and reforged, Othran whispered thanks. Some, however, resist. The chronicle describes a medic, Vatria, who refused the slow creep of rot. She sealed her suit, carved symbols of the Emperor into her palms, and fled through collapsing corridors. But Nurgle's touch is patient. It trails its chosen not as a predator, but as a grandfather following a stubborn child. Wherever she ran, she heard the soft pitter of droplets. She smelled sweet mold. After 3 days, she realized her fingernails were growing moss beneath the quick. By the 5th, she heard buzzing beneath her heartbeat. By the 7th, she could no longer remember why she had ever run from such kindness. When full corruption manifests, the host becomes a conduit, a doorway for Nurgle's will. Othran's body split open, not in agony, but in celebration. From him emerged a tide of plague sprites, laughing, dancing, weaving ribbons of pestilent joy through the air. Mortals fainted at the sight. Chaos Marines saluted in grim respect. Othran's voice thundered in 2 tones, one human, one impossibly ancient. "Rejoice," he gargled, his lungs flowering like blossoms. "For you are never alone." Those who listened felt fear soften into acceptance. Those who resisted felt their skin crawl with creeping vines. In the end, all melt. Worse still are the moments when Nurgle's personal attention drifts upon the chosen. The chronicle records that Othran felt something vast behind him, warm, humming, affectionate. A hand the size of a storm brushed his soul. He saw visions, cyclopean cauldrons boiling with creation, titanic gardens stretching across dimensions. A grandfather's smile carved from entropy itself. This was not the wrath of chaos, but its invitation. Othran wept pus-thick tears of joy. His transformation completed, he no longer walked, he swayed, lumbered, dripped. A blooming vessel. A blessed herald. Yet the Imperium strikes hard when corruption surfaces. Exterminatus was declared on Filian Hive. Fire reigned. Oceans boiled, skies screamed, but Nurgle's corruption thrives in death. Flame only feeds its fertility. As the world burned, Othran laughed, each exhale birthing new plagues that swam through smoke like fish in water. The chronicle claims that even the fire itself sickened. Its colors turned green, then purple, then died into smoke that whispered hymns. The final passages of the chronicle grow unstable, words slithering across the page as though trying to escape. It describes the moment the world cracked, revealing roots massive, pulsing, ancient, stretching beneath continents. They writhed as though awakening. Did they belong to Nurgle's garden, or something older? Scholars disagreed. Some tore out their eyes after reading. Others begged to be taken to the garden. A few laughed until their jaws unhinged. The scroll ends with a final trembling line, one no scholar has been willing to speak aloud. The ink glistens as though still wet, still alive. And though the words shift and distort, one meaning remains clear. The corruption was not spreading. It was returning. The corruption was not spreading. It was returning. So the chronicle had whispered in its final breath, but the echo of those words continued long after the ink fell silent. It drifted across the ruins of Filian Hive like a voice carried on dying wind, settling upon the armor of warriors who no longer believed in absolutes. Among them, Sister Palanth of the Order of the Iron Thorn knelt in the ash, helm removed, eyes glimmering with both wrath and something far darker doubt. She had witnessed Othran's final transformation, had seen fire recoil before rot. Now the chronicle's prophecy gnawed at her faith like unseen worms burrowing through parchment. She murmured the litany of the Emperor's radiance, yet the syllables felt thin, brittle, as though speaking a language the universe had begun to forget. The truth pressed against her skull. What if corruption had a rightful place, not as invader, but as inheritance? Whispers of the event spread among the remaining regiments like ghostlight flickering among graves. Commissar Varkos, a man carved from doctrine and fury, dismissed such doubts as heresy. He preached punishment, purgation, absolute obedience. Yet even he felt unease when a storm cloud of flies gathered above his company's standard and did not disperse. He blamed enemy sorcery, but his men exchanged glances, wondering if faith alone still shielded them. Around the campfires, soldiers spoke of Othrin's laughter, gentle, almost paternal, as the world burned. They admitted, in hushed tones, that the sound had not felt evil, it had felt truthful. Varkos silenced them with executions, but doubt did not die. It seeped from the corpses, a contagion of the mind more persistent than any plague. Within the shattered basilica of St. Illyra, its vaulted ceiling collapsed and stained glass melted into sickly spirals. Palanth sought clarity. She found instead a priest, Father Haldan, still alive beneath fallen marble, bones crushed, body rotting yet animated by will alone. He called out to her, not for aid, but for listening. "Child," he rasped, "the chronicles speak not of corruption as curse, but as cycle." His breath expelled clouds of spores. What if the Emperor's silence is not abandonment, but acceptance? Palanth recoiled, yet her heart trembled. Haldan's eyes glowed with neither devotion nor madness, but revelation. She fled, though his final words clung to her like spores to cloth. All things returned to their beginning. Even gods. Meanwhile, deep within the ruins, a chaos-mutilated astropath drifted through the veil of reality like a moth through smoke. Bound in chains inscribed with prayers long since powerless, her mind leaked visions into the minds of all nearby. She saw roots beneath stars, saw Nurgle's garden not as invader, but as architect. She whispered truths that should have been impossible. Before the Imperium, before Terra's rise, before the first bolt pistol roared. There was the bloom. Her handlers gagged her with rusted wire, but the vision poured still into soldiers, into priests, into Palanth. It spread like pollen. And in its wake grew realization. Corruption was not a rival. It was return to a cosmic order forgotten by the Imperium's brittle dogma. Varkos confronted Palanth when he sensed her wavering. His voice thundered through the bunker like a purity seal tearing under strain. "Your thoughts betray you, sister. You tread the edge of heresy." But his eyes, hard, unwavering, held their own ghosts. She noticed his fingers trembled where they gripped his bolt pistol. He had seen too much. He feared too much. They argued not with screams, but with exhausted breaths. Palanth spoke of Haldan's dying revelations. Varkos countered with scripture, yet scripture felt fragile now, a relic, not a weapon. When a lone fly landed on his cheek and he did not flinch, Palanthi's heart chilled. Conviction had begun to erode even in him. Night fell heavy and swollen, carrying the scent of rot across the trenches. Soldiers found their rations blooming with mold shaped like runes they could not read yet somehow understood. Bodies of their dead glistened with flowers that hummed faintly. None dared touch them. When a plasmagon overheated and melted into dripping, organic sludge, its Lux Mechanicus sigil still glowing, the tech priests wailed binary hymns of denial. They scraped at the sludge with incense blades, but every piece regrew. "Machine heresy," they cried, but their voices lacked power. They too felt the world slipping from the Emperor's grip. Something older, deeper, had begun reclaiming its domain. Palanth dreamed of the garden. She walked through towering trees grown from bone, each branch burdened with rotting fruit dripping ichor that reflected memories not her own. She saw humanity's rise, the age of strife, the Emperor's triumph, and beneath all of it, a rhythm. A cycle, decay feeding growth, feeding decay. She saw a throne not golden, but made of writhing roots, and upon it sat a figure both tender and monstrous. When she awoke drenched in cold sweat, a single mushroom had sprouted where her tears fell. She crushed it beneath her boot, whispering denial, but her voice cracked. Varkos gathered his officers for a final stand or a final purge. None were certain which. They descended into an abandoned manufactorum to plan, only to discover the walls rippling as though breathing. Machinery long dead began to churn, fueled not by promethium, but by pulsing veins that ran through metal plates. A single servo skull drifted down and in a croaking voice recited the same line from the chronicle. The corruption was not spreading. It was returning. Varkos fired upon it reflexively, but the fragments dissolved into spores that drifted like ash. In the eastern trench line, the surviving psychers formed a circle, their minds fraying at the edges. They attempted a warding ritual, but their warp light collapsed inward, revealing a glimpse of something beneath the planet's crust, something vast, coiled, patient. The psychers screamed as their eyes turned black with blooming veins. One whispered through bloodied teeth, "We stand upon roots older than chaos." As they perished, their final psychic flare spread the vision to every mind across the battlefield. For a moment, all saw the truth. Filian Hive had not fallen to corruption. It had awakened it. Palanth confronted Father Halden again, though he was now barely recognizable, more growth than flesh. His chest cavity opened like a flower as he spoke. "Child, loyalty is not the Emperor's alone. The galaxy bears many thrones." She raised her bolter, trembling, torn between duty and revelation. Halden's voice softened. "The Imperium teaches fear of decay. But decay is life's truest companion." Her finger hovered over the trigger. For one heartbeat, she hesitated. That hesitation became prophecy. For in that same heartbeat, Varkos entered the basilica. His gaze fell upon Palanth hesitant, and upon Halden transformed. And in that infinitesimal moment, something in Varkos broke. Not in fear, not in faith, in certainty. His hand lowered the pistol. And that was when the walls themselves peeled open like a wound, revealing a root massive, pulsating, ancient coiling toward them from the depths below. It carried not rot, but memory. Memory of a truth the Imperium had burned for 10,000 years. A truth Halden managed to speak with his final, rotted breath. The Emperor was not the first to claim dominion over mankind. The root shuddered, the basilica shook, and the world exhaled as though about to speak the rest of the truth. But the chronicle ends there. The basilica still trembled from the revelation, the root withdrawing into the deep like a serpent ashamed of being seen. In the settling silence, Palanth tasted dust and regret upon her tongue. Something within her faith fractured, not cleanly, but like glass cracking beneath slow pressure. Varkos stood motionless, staring at his own lowered pistol as though it belonged to a stranger. Outside, the sky churned green and bruised, as if the heavens themselves resisted what had been unveiled. Palanth retreated into memory, her early vows, her first victory, the warmth of belief she once carried like a shield. Now those memories felt foreign, relics dug from someone else's life. The Emperor's light no longer comforted her, it interrogated her. For the first time, she wondered whether faith was not a fortress, but a mask used to hide the deeper, older truth, carved into the bones of mankind. Word of the awakening root spread across the surviving regiments like a fever with no symptoms, only knowledge. Men and women who had never questioned doctrine now found their prayers rotten at the core, collapsing into hollow syllables. Some knelt in the mud and wept. Others clawed their faces raw, trying to carve certainty back into skin. Varkos addressed them with a voice scraped raw, insisting loyalty must remain, that doubt was the greatest contagion. Yet he could not hide the tremor in his stance, the widening of his pupils when shadows moved where shadows should not exist. A storm gathered overhead, unnatural, heavy with unseen weight. Thunder cracked like chains breaking. The soldiers flinched, unsure whether the storm was natural or a thought from a god, spoken aloud for all to hear. The astropath, still bound, still muttering truths that bled through her broken consciousness, felt the storm first. Her eyes rolled back, revealing pupils shaped like seeds. "He remembers us," she murmured, voice rippling with dread. "The first gardener." The one before Ra had a name. Her handlers tightened the chains, but her psychic scream burst outward, touching every mind in the trenches. The vision was disjointed, an ancient figure weaving humanity from soil and starlight, only to watch them crumble, rebuild, crumble again. It did not resemble Nurgle, nor any god known to chaos. It was older, deeper, a caretaker, a sculptor, a being forgotten deliberately. The astropath convulsed, whispering the same haunting line. Decay is not corruption. Decay is remembrance. Palanth felt the vision too. It burrowed into her skull, turning memory into loam, letting something foreign sprout in its place. She stumbled into the open air, gasping as if drowning. The ground beneath her boots pulsed. She tore off her gauntlet and pressed her bare palm to the soil, feeling warmth, movement, heartbeat. A consciousness stirred in the dirt, watching her with ancient patience. She recoiled, but the sensation clung to her skin. She whispered a prayer, but the words turned to dust, losing meaning even as she spoke them. Faith had become a cage she no longer fit within. The soil hummed again, the same rhythm she had felt in her dreams of the garden. The universe was speaking, not in language, but in pulse. Madness flickered at the edges of the battlefield. Some soldiers embraced the strange warmth in the earth, clutching mud to their chests like children reunited with a parent long thought dead. Others executed them as heretics. Skirmishes broke out within the ranks, pockets of belief clashing with pockets of awakening doubt. Varkos tried to restore order, firing into the air, yelling for unity, but each command felt drowned beneath the weight of new truth. He sensed his authority fading. He sensed himself fading. His mind replayed Palanthi's hesitation, Haldan's revelations, the walls blooming with roots. For the first time, the commissar wondered if purity was not strength, but brittle denial. And in that moment, flies gathered upon his coat, not swarming, not biting, merely resting, choosing him. Night fell like a dying star collapsing inward, dragging the world into a strange quiet. A psychic pressure grew, subtle yet suffocating. The astropath's restraints cracked as energy surged from her body, her mind reaching for something buried beneath the planet's crust. She screamed as her soul touched it, a consciousness vast enough to smother galaxies. Those nearby heard fragments like echoes from an unremembered age. Shaper, shepherd, betrayal, rebirth. The psychers burned out one by one, eyes liquefying as they channeled the truth no mortal mind was meant to see. And still the thing beneath the surface stirred. The world quivered under its awakening. Palanth felt the tremor in her bones. In the command bunker, Palanth and Varkos faced each other across a table scattered with maps rendered meaningless. Varkos tried to recite doctrine, but his voice crumbled beneath the weight of truth. Palanth placed her hand on the table, watching moss bloom beneath her fingertips. She did not recoil. She accepted it, if only to understand it. "If this being shaped us," she whispered, "what then is the Emperor?" Varkos slammed his fist down, shouting that faith must endure, that truth was irrelevant in the face of loyalty. But the rage in his eyes was fear wearing armor. He no longer spoke for the Emperor. He spoke to convince himself his reality had not dissolved. The bunker lights flickered as the planet groaned. Explosions erupted along the northern front, Imperial forces clashing with their own as dissent fractured into full civil conflict. Shadows twisted unnaturally, birthing shapes that skittered through the smoke. They resembled neither demon nor human, but something half-forgotten. Creatures of soil and void, guardians of an age erased. Palanth stood at the trench's edge, watching them emerge. They did not attack unless provoked. They simply observed. One reached out with a limb shaped like a root curling into fingers. She stepped back, but felt no malice. Only recognition. The creature tilted its head before sinking back into the earth, like a stone into water. The astropath's voice rose again as she levitated inches above the ground, chains snapping like brittle vines. Her eyes glowed with verdant light. Varkos aimed his weapon, but Palanth struck it aside. The astropath chanted a single phrase that shook the air. "The garden remembers its children." A pulse erupted from her body, rippling outward across the battlefield. All who felt it sensed a presence waking, not Nurgle, but something ancestral, coiled in the bedrock of creation. The pulse reached deep into the planet's heart. The ground split open. Steam and glowing spores poured out. Palanth felt her lungs tighten as the spores entered them. Yet instead of choking, she felt clarity flood her mind. Then came the vision for all, a towering figure sculpting early mankind from both flesh and fertile earth, a caretaker god, a gardener shaping bodies meant to grow, decay, and regrow endlessly. A cycle of eternity denied when the Emperor rose and severed humanity from its ancient root. Palanth saw the figure bound beneath the crust, imprisoned by the Emperor's earliest wars, forgotten because belief had been rewritten, reshaped. Humanity had not always belonged to the Imperium. It had been stolen, repurposed, and now the original bond stirred, reaching for its children once more. Palanth fell to her knees, mind quaking. Varkos stared in silent horror, his beliefs shattering like brittle bone. The astropath convulsed as the final fragment of truth poured through her, burning her away from within. She whispered one last revelation before her body dissolved into blooming spores. The first gardener is awakening, and beneath the planet, something vast smiled. Palanth rose from the cracked soil, her breath shallow, her thoughts ringing with the astropath's final utterance. The first gardener. The name reverberated like a forgotten oath whispered in a tomb. Around her, the battlefield swayed in a stunned hush, the air thick with spores that glowed like fading embers. Soldiers stared at their hands as if seeing them for the first time, tools, shaped not by the Emperor's will, but by something older, something buried beneath epochs of sanctioned truth. Varkos stumbled backwards, clutching his rosarius until his knuckles split. His faith felt like a corpse he was too afraid to bury. Above them, the sky pulsed with sickly light, storm clouds gathering with intent. Palanth tasted iron in her throat. She realized devotion had always carried a cost. Blindness, obedience, and the surrender of a past no one had been allowed to remember. Now the cost demanded payment in full. A distant rumble cracked the trembling quiet. It came from orbit, a low, grinding sound that made the ground vibrate like a drum struck by a titan's fist. The survivors turned upward just in time to see the silhouette of an Imperial cruiser descending into firing position. Its cannons flared with warning light, the promise of impending bombardment. The officers trembled. The rank and file whispered prayers already gutted of meaning. Varkos alone pushed forward, raising his chainsword toward the heavens in defiance, shouting that the Emperor would save the faithful. But his voice faltered midway, a fracture running through the words. He no longer knew whether he pleaded for salvation or begged for denial. The storm thickened, clouds bulging with unspent wrath, and lightning traced veins across the horizon, as though the sky itself prepared for judgment. Palanth felt something shifting beneath her boots, slow, deliberate, ancient. The first gardener stirred, awakening in groans that echoed through the bedrock. With each tremor, the soil warmed. Roots pushed upward through the dirt, like skeletal fingers reaching for light. She knelt to steady herself, and her gauntlet sank into mud that pulsed with faint luminosity. She felt a memory not her own, humanity's first breath in a cradle not of terra, but of soil sculpted by hands unrecorded. The realization hollowed her. If the Imperium's founding truth was a lie, what meaning did her oaths hold now? What purpose did her sacrifices serve? The garden beneath whispered reassurance, yet she recoiled. Purpose offered too freely felt like seduction. And she had already been seduced once by faith forged from war. Across the trenches, discipline dissolved into raw survival. Some soldiers fled toward the ruins of Filian Hive, hoping to escape the encroaching revelations. Others embraced the roots rising through the dirt, pressing foreheads to the glowing tendrils as if touching the pulse of a forgotten home. One trooper carved the aquila from his armor, sobbing as he held it like a relic of a lie told with love and brutality. A veteran sergeant shot him and then dropped the weapon, unable to justify why. The battlefield fractured into fragments of belief and terror, each heart beating a different rhythm, each mind grasping at meaning in a galaxy where truth had become a weapon of its own. Above them, the cruiser's guns finished charging, casting long shadows that quivered like dying prayers. Varkos climbed a ridge of broken ferrocrete, the weight of command crushing him like a collapsing star. He had executed heretics, tortured dissenters, and preached purity through gritted teeth, but never had he faced a truth that struck at the marrow of his own faith. He lifted his vox bead, demanding communication with the orbiting cruiser, but the line hissed with static. His voice cracked as he issued orders: retreat, regroup, purify, but each command dissolved into meaninglessness. The storm winds whipped his coat, carrying with them the scent of rot and blooming life intertwined. For the first time, Varkos understood that loyalty was not clarity, it was desperation. He looked down at Pilanth, watching her wrestle with revelations he himself refused to confront. And deep inside, a grief unfurled, quiet and bitter as old blood. The soil split open once more, revealing a cavernous fissure that glowed from within like a furnace of memory. Pilanth staggered toward it, compelled by instinct older than her lineage. Shapes moved inside shadows with form, outlines of ancient gardeners crafted from earth and void. Their faces were not faces at all, but arrangements of roots twisting into expressions, both maternal and monstrous. They watched her as a parent watches a child returning after centuries of estrangement. She felt warmth and dread in equal measure. A single tendril rose from the chasm and brushed her grieve. It felt like a blessing. It felt like a claim. She jerked back, breath shaking. The gardeners did not pursue. They simply waited, patient as erosion, certain that all things eventually returned home. A thunderous explosion erupted along the western flank as Imperial loyalists fired upon those they deemed contaminated. Bolter fire tore through bodies already trembling with inner conflict. Smoke billowed, mingling with spores in the air to create a haze that shimmered with unnatural colors. Pilanth rushed into the chaos, her bolter burning hot in her grip. She shot not at comrades, but at the sky, as if to challenge the orbiting executioner. The soldiers nearby hesitated, drawn to her defiance. For a moment, unity flickered, a fragile flame trembling against the void. But unity built upon fear was not strength. It was a temporary delusion. A loyalist officer bellowed for her death. A corrupted guardsman offered her protection. Both reached her at once. She stood between them as the world held its breath. The Psyker's death throes had left psychic rifts tearing through reality, shimmering like bruised wounds. From these rifts came whispers, voices that carried the weight of epics. They spoke of betrayal older than the Imperium, older than chaos, an ancient sundering between the first gardener and an unnamed adversary whose throne was forged from stolen destiny. Pilanth felt these whispers coil around her mind, tugging at her beliefs like threads unraveling a cloak. Varkos heard them too, though he denied it with clenched teeth. The voices revealed that humanity had once walked in harmony with decay and rebirth, but that harmony had been severed by a usurper who feared the power of cycles. Pilanth staggered as the truth sank in. The Emperor had not merely conquered humanity, he had rewritten its origin. The cruiser's engines roared as its firing sequence reached final lock. A killing sun formed at its prow, a burning sphere of righteous annihilation. The air on the ground trembled with its heat, though the shot had not yet descended. Soldiers screamed for cover, others screamed for mercy. Pilanth stood unmoving, watching the forming annihilation with a strange calm. She knew that if the world burned, the first gardener would die with it, or be unleashed in a form no mind could endure. Varkos climbed to her side, face pale with fear and resolve mingled. "We must act," he said, his voice low, trembling. She nodded, though neither knew whether action meant rebellion or surrender. As the light above intensified, the fissure below responded. The roots erupted upward in a spiral, forming a colossal pillar that split the sky. The cruiser trembled, its systems flickering as if gripped by an unseen force. The storm roared as the roots reached toward the ship, not to attack, but to remember it. Pilanth watched in awe as visions flooded her senses, the gardener touching ships of ancient design, cradling early voidfarers, nurturing humanity's first steps into the stars. The past spiraled into the present, the roots wrapped gently around the cruiser's silhouette, and for a heartbeat, the firing sequence faltered. In that fragile pause, Varkos made his choice. He threw down his weapon, falling to his knees. Not in surrender to the Imperium, nor in submission to the gardener, but in mourning for the man he had been. His voice cracked with confession. "I do not know what is truth anymore." Palanth knelt beside him, placing her hand over his. No prayer, no doctrine, only shared doubt. That intimacy shook them more than any revelation, for doubt had become their only unbroken bond. The cruiser's guns recharged, brighter now, burning through the interference. The roots trembled, recoiling. Palanth felt the world tighten, fate drawing breath before unleashing its next catastrophe. The air vibrated with imminent death. And then the ground beneath her split open, not with violence, but with purpose. A hand emerged, not human, not demon, but made of intertwined roots glowing like embers of creation. It reached for her. The first gardener had chosen. And as its touch neared her skin, Palanth understood that this was not salvation. It was transformation. The storm broke without warning, as though the heavens themselves tore open under the strain of revelation. The choir of ash screamed one last time before their throats burst, their psychic wails triggering a cascade of warp fire that spiraled into the ravaged sky. Azarian staggered through the debris of the dying citadel, armor cracked, faith bleeding out through the fractures. He saw the world distort before him, reality trembling like a wounded beast, and felt the truth he had spent a lifetime avoiding press against the edges of his mind. The Emperor's light flickered not because the galaxy failed him, but because something vast and hungry had begun to awaken beneath the bedrock of belief itself. A sound rose from the ruins, at once a sob and a chuckle, and Azarian realized it was his own voice, breaking under the pressure of what he could no longer deny. The veil thinned until it was no more than a trembling membrane, and through it, shapes pressed, swollen silhouettes breathing rot and whispers. Nurgle's corruption seeped across the battlefield in slow, affectionate waves, touching broken stone, shattered armor, torn flesh. Yet the horror lay not in the rot, but in the serenity that accompanied it. Warriors who moments before screamed defiance now knelt in quiet acceptance, smiles cracking their swollen faces. They thought they had resisted temptation, but only now understood that resistance had been the bait. Azarian tried to pull his brothers away, but their hands clung with unnatural strength. "He forgives us," they murmured. "He forgives all wounds." And as their bodies softened into suppurating masses of devotion, Azarian felt the ground pulse beneath him, a heartbeat older than stars, inviting him to listen. In the upper strata of the void, the fleet reeled under a storm of impossible geometry. Ships twisted like wounded birds, their machine spirits shrieking through vox channels in a chorus of synthetic despair. Captain Aurelia Caste slammed her fist against the command lectern, demanding reports. But every augur screamed the same truth. Something beneath the planet's surface was warping the void itself. The star beside them dimmed, as though smothered by an unseen hand. Her crew whispered of omens, of forbidden doctrines buried in apocrypha, secrets the Inquisition swore had been purged. Aurelia stared at the flickering hololithic projection, watching the surface distort into a grotesque spiral. She could not shake the feeling that they were not witnessing an invasion, but a return. The warp storm outside the viewing bay swelled like a vast rotting lung drawing its first breath in millennia. On the surface, priestesses of the Sable Creed gathered beneath a shattered basilica, chanting litanies cracked by doubt. Their hymns trembled, not with devotion, but with fear. Fear that their faith had been built upon an assumption rather than a revelation. The eldest among them, High Cantor Mararith, lifted her rusted censer and felt the incense coil in patterns she had never seen. It formed a spiral, always the same spiral, as if pulled by an unseen gravity. She wondered, with growing dread, whether the Emperor's hatred of chaos was not a rejection but a warning. The stone beneath her feet groaned, splitting in a slow, deliberate line that traced the same spiral. Her disciples gasped, some falling to their knees, others fleeing. Marith alone remained standing, whispering a prayer whose words trembled with the certainty she no longer possessed. Amid the ruin, the last of the Palatine wardens formed a defensive ring, but their formation meant nothing against what came crawling from the fractured earth. They expected demons, taloned horrors, shrieking beasts, but instead emerged creatures that resembled those they once loved. Fathers, sisters, battle brothers, all swollen and luminous with plague, their voices soft, almost pleading. "Don't you recognize us?" One whispered through a jaw unhinged with rot. "We never stopped loving you," the wardens faltered. Memories collided with duty. A single hesitation shattered their discipline. The corrupted surged forward, not with rage but with embrace, their touch dissolving ceramite and skin alike. Captain Raylan bellowed for retreat, but retreat meant nothing here. As he watched his troops fall to a mercy more terrifying than hatred, he felt a suspicion gnaw his spirit, that the enemy did not want to conquer them, but to welcome them home. Azarian staggered into the temple vault, the air thick with dust and the metallic scent of old blood. The Archivum mechanists lay dead, twisted into grotesque shapes as if pulled inside out by a truth they could not bear. At the chamber's center sat the artifact, the one the Inquisition had forbidden Ethan to name. Its surface rippled like infected skin, runes crawling in patterns that echoed the spiral carved across the land. Azarian approached, fighting the nausea rising in him. The artifact whispered not with sound, but with memory, memories not his own. He saw civilizations that never made it into any imperial record, empires that rose and fell before mankind crawled from Terra's cradle, all consumed by the same gentle corruption. When the whispering ceased, Azarian collapsed, weeping. For the first time, he understood that Nurgle's rot was not a curse. It was the galaxy's oldest inheritance. Above the battlefield, Aurelia's ship lurched violently as the star's light dimmed further, curling in on itself like a dying ember. Astropaths screamed, clawing at their blindfolds until blood streamed down their faces. One collapsed into Aurelia's arms, whispering a single, trembling phrase, "It remembers us." Before she could demand clarity, the warp outside split open, not in violence but in a slow unfurling, like a flower blooming in reverse. Tendrils of sickly light reached toward the planet, wrapping it in a cocoon. Aurelia felt a presence brush against her mind, warm and fatherly, promising endurance, promising peace. She recoiled, ordering the crew to seal the sacred chambers, but it was too late. The ship's machine spirit purred with contentment, its once crisp tone now sluggish, softened, adoring. Aurelia realized with horror that the corruption had reached even the steel. Marith wandered the broken basilica, censer still in hand, her eyes unfocused. The spiral beneath her feet pulsed like a second heart, guiding her toward an altar that had long been sealed. She felt her doubts crystallize into a single unbearable truth. Their faith had been built atop a wound, and that wound had never healed. As she approached the altar, its stone crumbled, revealing a pit lined with bones, bones arranged deliberately, lovingly, as though laid in rest by a careful hand. In the center, a single skull glowed with soft green luminescence. Marith reached out, compelled by an instinct older than doctrine, but the moment her fingers brushed the bone, visions flooded her mind. She saw the first worshippers of decay, long before chaos had names. She saw the origin of rot, not as an infection, but as a blessing willingly embraced. The Warden's final stand took place in the Garden of Rust, where ancient war machines decayed beneath the vines of centuries. Raylan dragged his wounded sergeant behind a collapsed dreadnought, but the enemy moved gently through the overgrowth, their steps soft, almost reverent. Raylan aimed his bolter, but his hands trembled, not from fear, but from grief. The corrupted approached, whispering promises of relief from pain, of rest from unending war. His sergeant, delirious from blood loss, reached out toward them, a peaceful smile softening her features. Raylan tried to hold her back, but she slipped from his grasp, embraced by the rotting figures who welcomed her like kin returning from exile. Raylan fell to his knees, his faith splintering. In that moment, he realized the most terrifying truth of all. The corruption offered not death, but solace. Azarian crawled toward the artifact as it pulsed brighter, the chamber trembling with its awakening. He knew he should destroy it, but destruction felt like betrayal, as if he were murdering a sleeping child. He remembered the visions, worlds healed through decay, species united in shared surrender. He remembered the warmth in those memories, the absence of fear. A part of him longed for it. But deeper still, buried beneath the rot-softened layers of temptation, lived a stubborn ember of imperial faith. He rose, shaking, lifting his blade. The artifact whispered again, this time in his own voice, telling him that resistance was not bravery, but denial. His resolve faltered. His breaths came ragged. As he raised the blade for the killing strike, the artifact opened like an eye and looked directly at him. Aurelia watched the warp cocoon tighten around the planet, her heart pounding with a dread she had no words for. She ordered the fleet to initiate full retreat, but the engines responded with a chorus of gentle refusal, their igniters purring like content creatures. The ship no longer obeyed her. The ship no longer needed her. Through the viewports, she saw the planet's surface ripple, the spiral widening, glowing, alive. Her officers prayed, some to the Emperor, some to anything that would listen, but Aurelia remained silent. She understood now that they were not witnessing an attack, they were witnessing an acceptance. The corruption was not invading, it was being remembered. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass, whispering a vow she knew she could never keep. I will not yield. The warp answered her with a fatherly laugh. Marith stumbled from the pit, her face wet with tears she did not recall shedding. The skull lay glowing behind her, illuminating the basilica in a sickly reverent light. She knew what she had seen, the first covenant of rot, the ancient pact of surrender, the truth that humanity had forgotten. She stepped into the gathering storm outside, feeling the ground tremble beneath her feet. Her disciples watched her with fear and awe, their faith unraveling thread by trembling thread. Marith raised her censer with hands that no longer shook. We were wrong, she whispered, though whether she spoke to them or to herself, she could not say. As the wind carried the scent of decay across the ruins, her disciples realized that something within her gaze had changed, not broken, but opened. In the temple vault, Azarian dropped to his knees as the artifact's gaze pierced through him. He felt his memories unravel, not erased, but softened, rearranged, rewritten into a gentler shape. He heard the voices of his fallen brothers, not in agony, but in forgiveness. He saw his failures laid bare, yet no judgment followed. The corruption reached for him not with claws, but with open arms. His blade fell from trembling fingers. The spiral pulsed once more, radiating through the planet, through the fleet, through the warp itself. Something ancient shifted in response, as though the galaxy exhaled for the first time in 10,000 years. Azarian's lips parted in a whisper, a prayer, or a surrender. But before the words could form, the vault cracked open behind him, and a figure stepped through the collapsing stone. Someone who was never meant to return. And the saga's fate changed forever. The figure who stepped from the collapsing stone did not stride like a conqueror, nor loom like a nightmare. He moved as though exhausted by eternity, as though the eons had worn him thin. His armor, once radiant, hung upon him like a memory. Azarian could barely speak as the echoes of the collapsing vault trembled around them. The figure placed a hand upon the artifact, and the light within it dimmed, as though soothed back into slumber. This was never meant for your age, he murmured, voice softer than dust on a forgotten tomb. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Azarian reached toward him, seeking truth, absolution, something, anything. The figure only shook his head. Faith is not a shield, he whispered. It is a burden you chose to carry. And then he faded, swallowed by the settling dust, leaving Azarian alone with a silence older than war. When Azarian emerged from the ruined vault, the battlefield had stilled. No cries, no gunfire, no roars of demons or echoes of prayer. Only a vast and aching quiet lay across the land, as if the world mourned something it could not name. Rot blossomed gently across the fallen, soft moss growing over ceramite and bone, weaving the dead into a single tapestry of stillness. The corrupted no longer moved. They gazed skyward with serene expressions, as if their souls had already stepped beyond mortal pain. Azarian knelt beside one of his brothers, brushing frost-like spores from their armor. For the first time in his life, he could not tell whether what he witnessed was tragedy or mercy. The question carved itself into his heart like a wound. Was this the price of endurance, or the surrender humanity had feared for 10,000 years? High Cantor Mar-Rith walked through the broken basilica with the air of someone carrying the final verses of a dying religion. Her censer swung lightly, its incense drifting into the dawn's cold light, forming shapes that dissolved before they could be understood. She touched the cracked pillars, the shattered icons, the deep fissures where the spiral had pulsed, and felt no fear, only inevitability. Her disciples followed, uncertain, whispering prayers that sounded hollow in the vast stillness. Marith paused before a statue of a saint whose face had been melted by warp light, leaving only an impression of sorrow. "We built our faith on foundations we did not understand," she said, her voice stripped bare. "And yet, we believed." She wondered if belief itself carried value, even when misguided. Or was belief merely a lantern held in darkness, comforting but blind? Above the world, Aurelia Caius stood alone on her ship's observation deck, staring at the dimmed star. The cocoon of warp light had receded like a tide withdrawing from shore, leaving behind a calm that unsettled her more than any storm. Her crew slept in uneasy stillness, their minds cocooned by whatever vestiges of corruption lingered in the air. Aurelia alone remained awake, perhaps because her will had grown harder than steel after decades of war. She pressed a hand against the viewport, feeling the cold seep into her bones. "Was this victory?" she whispered. The void gave no answer. Stars glimmered like distant memories, each a reminder of battles won, empires lost, prayers unanswered. For the first time, she wondered whether humanity's greatest enemy was not chaos, but the unyielding belief that they must always endure. The Garden of Rust lay silent, dew settling upon crumbling war machines as though blessing them into peaceful slumber. Raylan limped among the fallen, his boots sinking into soft moss-covered ash. The corrupted figures who had embraced his sergeant now stood frozen in place, their faces locked in expressions of quiet relief. Raylan touched the hand of one such figure, once a friend, once an enemy, now neither. His sergeant lay nearby, her expression serene, her body partially entwined with verdant tendrils that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Raylan felt no fear, only an aching exhaustion. "If this is peace," he murmured, "why did we spend 10,000 years fleeing it?" He lifted his gaze to the pale sky, searching for a sign from the Emperor. None came, only a drifting petal of rot, harmless as dust. In the outskirts of the ruined city, children who had survived the devastation wandered between fallen statues and melted habs, gathering remnants of banners that no longer meant anything. They whispered stories they barely understood, tales of warriors from the sky, of monsters of love and decay, of gods who demanded everything and offered nothing. One child held a fragment of a purity seal, its ink smeared into unreadability. She traced the broken words and asked her brother, "What did they pray for?" He shrugged. Maybe they didn't know. Their innocence gave shape to a question even the greatest theologians had never answered. Does faith matter when its meaning is forgotten? They continued onward, their small figures dwarfed by the skeletons of titans, their footsteps the first signs of life in a world trying to remember how to breathe. The artifact, now dark and inert, lay buried beneath rubble, but its presence lingered like an echo. In distant corners of the galaxy, psychers flinched without knowing why. Machine spirits hummed a note lower than usual. Even warp currents seemed to flow with a new, subdued rhythm. Something had shifted, not broken, not healed, but changed. A new chapter had carved itself into the marrow of existence, one that no chronicler could fully decipher. In a hidden chamber aboard Aurelia's ship, a servo-skull recorded this subtle quiet, its ancient protocols believing silence itself to be an anomaly worth preserving. Somewhere in the void, a single question drifted through psychic strands like drifting smoke. When corruption becomes comfort, is purity still salvation? Azarian walked the long road back toward the Imperial encampment, though he doubted any command structure remained. His armor was cracked, his blade dulled, his soul heavier than ever. Yet he moved with purpose, carrying the memory of the figure he had seen, the one who had spoken of burden rather than truth. As the wind carried spores across the horizon, Azarian breathed them without flinching. They brought no sickness, no visions, no pull. Only a faint scent of earth after rain. Perhaps corruption had lost interest in him. Or perhaps he had lost interest in resisting anything that felt like peace. But one question haunted him more than any nightmare. If the Emperor demanded endurance, and Nurgle offered acceptance, which path required greater strength? Ma'arif gathered the remnants of her disciples in the courtyard, the cracked fountain behind them still dripping with pale, viscous liquid from the corrupted storm. She looked into their weary faces and knew they waited for answers she could not provide, so she offered only truth. "Faith is not certainty," she said. "It is a wound we choose to keep open so that hope can breathe through it." Some wept. Others turned away. A few knelt, not in worship but in resignation. Ma'arif lifted her censer and released a final plume of incense that drifted skyward, catching the newborn light of dawn. She wondered if the galaxy, in all its grief, had ever known a dawn that did not follow a massacre. Aurelia finally activated the ship's Vox recorder, her voice steady but hollow. "This is Captain Coast. The world below lives, though changed. The fleet remains, though changed. I remain. And I do not know what that means." She paused, looking once more into the void where the warp had touched reality with gentle rot. "If there are gods who listen, let them answer. Are we meant to endure, or merely survive until we are forgotten?" The recorder clicked off. She closed her eyes. No answer came. And perhaps that was the final truth. In the twilight of that wounded world, as banners rustled into dust and cathedrals slumped like giants laid to rest, a lone remembrancer recorded the last lines of this chronicle, not to explain, but to preserve. His ink trembled as he wrote of warriors who questioned their faith, of gods who whispered mercy through decay, of a galaxy that continued to turn despite its scars. He ended his chronicle with a question no prophecy could resolve. When all that remains is endurance, what becomes of hope? He left the page open, letting the wind decide its final resting place. And now, traveler of distant stars, keeper of fleeting stories, if this tale has left a mark upon your soul, stand witness. Like, subscribe, share, and let your thoughts echo in the comments, so the chronicle may continue.